Imagine you're walking down a dark, completely empty alleyway in Tulsa, and out of the shadows, this desperate young man just steps right into your path.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a terrifying scenario.
Right. It blocks your exit completely, and he pulls out an ice pick, grips it tight, and basically demands everything you have. I mean, your heart rate would just spike, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, your entire biological system is screaming at you to make a choice. It's, fight for your life or turn and run as fast as you can.
Exactly, fight or flight. But what if the only way to actually survive that encounter, the only way to truly disarm him, right, was to offer him a book and look him dead in the eye with, like, complete, unconditional compassion?
Which goes against literally every single survival instinct woven into our DNA.
It totally does.
Yeah.
And today, we are taking a deep dive into a story that flips those exact human instincts entirely upside down. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, we're looking at excerpts from this really fascinating narrative fiction script today. It's titled The Road Called Purpose, written by Jeffrey Turner and Warner DeVales.
And at its core, it's a story about the iconic geography of Route 66, right?
It is, yeah. But it completely strips away all that typical nostalgia. The diners, the vintage cars, all of that. It uses the asphalt not really as a backdrop for a physical road trip, but as this deeply layered metaphor for spiritual restoration, human connection, and, well, what it actually takes to intervene in a broken life.
Yeah, and the anchor for all of this is our protagonist, Warner DeVales. And he's fascinating because he completely defies the traditional archetype of, like, a spiritual leader.
Oh, entirely.
Like, you aren't going to find him standing behind a polished wooden pulpit wearing robes asking for tithes. He's a drifter. He's got these dusty boots, a worn-out backpack, and he is walking the entire length of Route 66 completely on foot.
And the really brilliant catch here is the direction he's going.
Right, yeah. He starts in California, and he is walking east toward Chicago.
Which is such a highly intentional geographical choice by the authors. I mean, the Great American Road Trip is almost always oriented west.
Always. Yeah, it's totally ingrained in our cultural mythos.
Yeah.
You pack up, you point the headlights toward the Pacific, and you escape.
Exactly. The open road out west
Right.
represents this blank slate. It's a way to leave your failures entirely in the rearview mirror. But Warner is doing the exact opposite.
It's almost like I look at Warner's journey as a sort of reverse manifest destiny.
Oh, I like that. That's a great way to frame it.
Because historically, the push west was all about conquest. It was about claiming land, extracting gold, building empires, asserting dominance. But Warner is walking east to surrender.
Right.
He isn't looking for gold. He is deliberately walking into the wreckage of society to find broken people. He's moving toward the pain, not away from it.
That framing really captures the essence of the script perfectly.
Yeah.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of how he engages with that wreckage, I think it's probably worth setting some boundaries for our conversation today.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Because the source material is pretty specific.
It is. If you're listening to this, you might quickly notice that this text is heavily rooted in Christian theology and scripture. I mean, Warner carries a Bible, and his motivations are explicitly faith-based.
Right. But our goal today...
Exactly. Our analytical lens today isn't to endorse a specific religious worldview or, debate the theology itself. We are just here to impartially unpack the literary and narrative themes the authors are presenting.
We're really dissecting how this story tackles universal human experiences. Things like profound isolation, the paralysis of trauma, and the complex anatomy of redemption.
Precisely. And the authors, they really waste no time putting Warner's methodology to the test.
No, they don't. We see it almost immediately in the blistering isolation of the California and Arizona deserts. The script introduces this concept of what do they call it? A ministry of presence.
Right, the ministry of presence, which basically means Warner's defining characteristic is that he does not lead with a sermon.
Yeah, he doesn't just walk up to people who are suffering and start, reciting scripture at them. He starts by anchoring himself in their physical reality.
Which serves to ground these really high-minded spiritual themes in absolute dirt and grime. I mean, it's a very tactile narrative.
It's entirely tactile. Take that scene in Barstow. He comes across this young runaway mechanic named Eli, who is just completely defeated, struggling to fix a broken-down truck.
And Warner doesn't just hand him a religious pamphlet and wish him well.
No, he literally gets underneath the truck.
Right.
He spends an hour covered in grease, physically laboring alongside Eli to fix the engine. And it's only after the mechanical problem is solved that he hands Eli a verse card.
Yeah, it's from Matthew. And we see That exact same mechanism applied to psychological trauma later on, which is obviously much harder to fix than an engine.
Oh, yeah, like in the Navajo Nation, around mile marker 242.
Exactly. Warner encounters Ben Yazzie there. And Ben is a Marine veteran suffering from severe PTSD, basically hiding out in the desert, completely alienated from society.
Okay, I actually have to pause here and challenge the text's premise for a second, because this is where a narrative like this can really lose a critical reader, you know?
Okay, how so?
Well, does the script run the risk of insulting the audience's intelligence by oversimplifying deeply complex trauma? As a reader, it feels pretty unbelievable that handing a stranger a laminated Bible verse is going to cure a combat veteran's PTSD.
I see what you mean, yeah.
Right, like a runaway's broken home or a soldier's shattered psyche. They can't be fixed by just reading a sentence in the desert.
Well, if the script were arguing that the paper itself possessed some sort of magical healing properties, you'd be absolutely right to call it naive. But the authors are doing something much more sophisticated with the psychology of these encounters.
Okay, so what's the actual mechanism there?
The narrative isn't arguing that the ink on the card heals Ben Yazzie. It's arguing that the time and the shared physical endurance validate the message.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, Warner's presence, the fact that he chooses to sit in silence in the dirt for hours, absorbing the blistering heat alongside this veteran, that is what disrupts Ben's isolation.
So it's a sociological point, really.
Exactly. The text is saying that many people living on the extreme fringes of society aren't looking to be saved in an abstract theological sense. They need to be saved from the suffocating reality of feeling entirely unseen.
Wow. Okay. So the verse card Warner leaves Ben, the one that simply says, "You are not invisible, brother," is really just a physical receipt for the hours Warner spent proving that statement true.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Yes, a physical receipt.
Okay, the physical labor is like the load-bearing wall, and the verse card is just the framing.
I like that mechanical breakdown.
Yeah, because if you try to put up the framing without pouring the concrete foundation of actual sacrificial time, the whole structure just collapses. And he does the exact same thing later in Texel, Oklahoma, right?
He does, yeah, with Haley Vincent.
Right, the deeply frustrated real estate agent. He totally ruins his hands, changing a flat tire for her, before leaving her a card saying, "God sees you."
Yeah.
It's the action that gives the words their weight.
And this emphasis on quiet, one-on-one presence, it actually sets up the narrative's central conflict.
How so?
Well, once the authors establish Warner's grassroots method, they pivot sharply to critique modern institutional religion. They essentially use Warner as a foil to expose the performative nature of what we might call loud religion.
Oh, right. The contrast is jarring and honestly pretty brilliant. Like in Flagstaff, the script places Warner right next to a massive state-of-the-art megachurch.
Well, that scene is so vivid.
It is. The church is shiny, it's loud, it's successful by every modern metric, and Warner deliberately ignores it. Instead, he follows the faint sound of a hymn to this forgotten, freezing church hidden away in the pines.
The place is practically falling apart. There is no sign out front.
Right. The pastor has a severe stutter, there are exactly 6 people sitting in the pews, and the building has absolutely no heat. And Warner doesn't take over the pulpit to preach a better sermon.
No, he does something much more practical.
He empties his own wallet to pay for a repairman to fix their heater, proving to those 6 people that they are still on, quote, God's map.
And we see that critique of performative faith escalate even further when he gets to Amarillo, Texas.
Oh, the Dust Bowl revival.
Yes, Warner walks into this event, and the authors paint a very specific picture here. There's a young, highly polished preacher shouting into a microphone, pacing the stage, basically trying to whip a totally unresponsive, exhausted crowd into a spiritual frenzy.
He is relying entirely on volume and spectacle.
Exactly. And then Warner steps up onto some hay bales barefoot and speaks quietly over the wind. And he tells the crowd, revival doesn't start with noise, it starts with surrender.
You know, if we look at this through the lens of our current attention economy, it makes total sense why that young preacher is failing.
You mean?
Well, modern megachurches, much like social media influencers, they often function like fast food.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. They are meticulously engineered to be bright, loud, highly entertaining, and consumed incredibly quickly. It's a dopamine hit. But what Warner is offering in this script is like slow food.
Slow food, I like that.
It's entirely unbranded, it's quiet, it requires a massive time investment, but it is deeply, fundamentally nourishing to the human psyche.
That slow food analogy perfectly captures the recurring motif of the empty pulpit in the text, too. You see this again in Weatherford, Oklahoma.
Oh, right, with Deacon Ray.
Yes. Warner finds this exhausted man preaching to an empty room, convinced the society has completely abandoned faith for cheap entertainment. And Warner steps in with a quiet, authentic message that organically brings 26 people into the pews without a single flyer, marketing budget, or, social media post.
Wow.
The authors are really positing that the most profound shifts in human consciousness happen far away from microphones and fog machines. True leadership, according to this narrative, is just the willingness to step into the dark, unglamorous gaps that institutions have abandoned because they don't yield a high return on investment.
But stepping into those gaps introduces a massive variable, doesn't it? Because those gaps aren't just empty, they're often incredibly dangerous.
They really are.
And this is where the script pushes Warner's philosophy of quiet grace to its absolute limit, testing it against raw, street-level violence and despair.
Yeah, the narrative strips away the safety of the church walls entirely here. The stakes become life and death.
They really do. Like in Elk City, Oklahoma, Warner encounters Tessa. She's a pregnant runaway sitting behind a gas station, holding a box cutter, actively contemplating ending her own life.
Such a tense scene.
It is, and Warner doesn't panic. He doesn't call the authorities or try to physically disarm her. He just sits near her, shares his food, and eventually calmly walks her to a women's clinic.
But then in Tulsa, the threat is directed entirely at him.
Right, this is the alleyway scene we talked about at the beginning. A young man named Malik tries to rob Warner, pressing an ice pick against him.
And Warner doesn't fight back, and he doesn't try to run.
No, he offers Malik his Bible, telling him the truth inside it is free. Malik just completely breaks down, drops the weapon, and weeps. And later, riding through Choctaw County, Warner gets in a car with a young woman named Jaya.
Oh, the gun on the passenger seat.
Yeah, she has a loaded handgun and is driving to murder the men who killed her brother. And again, Warner doesn't lunge for the gun. He simply tells her she can use the memory of her brother as a grave to be buried in, or a foundation to build on.
These scenes are truly the crucible for Warner's entire worldview.
But okay, as an analytical reader, I have to ask the difficult question again. How does the narrative justify his survival here? Isn't there a dangerous literary trope at play, like romanticizing extreme violence?
You mean making him seem invincible?
Yeah. Warner approaches armed, traumatized people with nothing but a soft voice. It borders on giving him comic book superhero plot armor. Why doesn't Malik just stab him and take his wallet?
Well, that is the critical tension of the book. To understand why he survives, we have to dissect the psychology of those encounters, particularly the fight-or-flight response.
Okay, let's break it down.
Let's look at the mechanics of the robbery with Malik. When someone initiates a violent robbery, they have a deeply ingrained psychological script of how the interaction will go.
Right, they expect you to act a certain way.
Exactly. They expect the victim to either freeze in terror, fight back aggressively, or run away. And any of those three reactions basically validates the robber's use of violence.
It fits the script.
Yes. But Warner introduces a fourth, completely paradoxical option: disarming generosity. By offering Malik the Bible and telling him it's free, Warner completely short-circuits the psychological script. It creates massive cognitive dissonance for Malik.
He effectively removes the friction. Like, if I push against a wall, I expect it to push back. If the wall suddenly turns to air, I just fall forward under my own weight.
Precisely. And from a literary perspective, the authors are using these physical weapons. Tessa's box cutter, Malik's ice pick, Jaya's handgun as outward, tangible manifestations of inward spiritual agony.
So the weapon is just the symptom of the pain.
Exactly. Warner survives because he ignores the weapon and speaks directly to the soul holding it. When Jaya is consumed by homicidal vengeance, Warner doesn't attack her anger or judge her for it. He invites her to lay down the exhausting burden of carrying it.
Wow.
By offering radical vulnerability instead of defense, he forces these characters to look their own pain in a mirror. He disarms the threat by humanizing the attacker.
Which is incredibly powerful in the moment. But, it leaves a lingering practical question about the aftermath. What happens to these people after Warner leaves?
Because he doesn't stay.
He doesn't. He has these profound, life-altering interventions. He pulls someone back from the absolute brink of destruction, and then he just packs up his backpack and keeps walking east.
Right. And we transition here to the culmination of his journey, and the script heavily emphasizes this concept of passing the baton.
Because the narrative has an obligation to answer the question of sustainability, right? If Warner is just a temporary Band-Aid, then his entire philosophy is flawed.
Exactly. The authors have to prove that his interventions create lasting change.
And they really go out of their way to map out that sustainability. Warner refuses to build a personal empire. He leaves Malik at the New Mercy shelter in Tulsa. And we see Malik literally trade his ice pick for a mop, and eventually he asks the shelter director for a hammer because he wants to start building things instead of destroying them.
That's such a great visual progression.
It is. And Jaya, the woman with the gun, and a biker named Caleb, who, by the way, had previously taken a brutal beating from his own gang just to protect Warner and Jaya, they end up surviving a massive twin tornado together in Rolla, Missouri.
Oh, that sequence is intense.
So intense. They get baptized in the aftermath, they fall in love, and they get married in St. Louis. And true to form, Warner slips out the back door of their wedding reception. He leaves them handwritten letters instructing Caleb to serve others and Jaya to walk in the calm she finally found.
See, he is a catalyst. He initiates the reaction, but he removes himself from the equation so the reaction can sustain itself.
He does it in every single city. In Springfield, Illinois, he finds Raina, a guilt-ridden teenager digging through a dumpster. He buys her a hot meal, introduces her to a local pastor, quietly leaves a check to cover her care, and just walks out of town.
And then in Pontiac, he meets Julian.
The wealthy prodigal son who ran away from a life of privilege on the North Shore of Chicago. Warner reads him the parable of the prodigal son, convinces Julian to finally call his father, and leaves him at a payphone.
It all builds to the final scene in Chicago, which operates as this really brilliant subversion of expectations.
The ending is spectacular. Warner reaches the physical end of his journey at the metal street sign in Chicago that reads, "Begin Route 66.
I love that detail.
Yeah. He sits on a bench under the sign and strikes up a conversation with a man named Mason. And Mason isn't a runaway or a homeless veteran. He is a wealthy corporate broker. But he is completely hollow inside, proving that spiritual brokenness and isolation don't care about your tax bracket.
Let's unpack the literary paradox of that final image for a second.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Warner has just walked over 2,000 miles. He has reached his geographical finish line. But the sign above his head literally says, "Begin."
Right.
For Warner, the journey was never about conquering a map or reaching a destination. He sits on that bench and points Mason toward what the text calls the narrow gate. The overarching thesis of the script culminates right here. The final harvest, the ultimate fixing of a human soul, belongs to heaven. Humans, from the author's perspective, are merely meant to plant the seeds. Warner's physical journey stops, but the reverberations of his presence, the seeds he planted in Malik, in Jaya, in Eli, they continue to grow without him.
I think the best way to describe Warner is that he operates like the wind. He sweeps into these stagnant harbors, he fills the sails of these completely stranded ships, and then he moves on so they can navigate the open waters themselves. He is an anti-hero of destination.
I think anti-hero of destination is a profound way to summarize his character. He rejects that very human desire for legacy and recognition.
He absolutely refuses to be the focal point of anyone else's story. So to pull all of these threads together for you listening, the story of the road called Purpose uses the cracked asphalt of Route 66 to map out a blueprint for radical compassion.
That's exactly it.
Whether you personally subscribe to the specific theology woven into the text or not, the underlying mechanics of this story are incredibly potent. The idea of stopping for the broken, of choosing to sit in the dirt and listen without judgment, of utilizing radical vulnerability to short-circuit violence, and of truly seeing the unseen, that is a universally vital lesson.
It demands that the reader completely redefine what a meaningful interaction looks like. It strips away the fog machines and the megaphones, and it argues that true impact is found in absolute sacrificial presence in the most mundane, gritty moments of life.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly uncomfortable thought to chew on. Throughout the script, Warner DeVales operates on the unwavering belief that every random encounter is a divine appointment. Nobody is an accident. But let's look at that through the lens of our modern reality. We live in an era of unprecedented digital tracking, algorithmic surveillance, and social media broadcasting. Technologically speaking, we have never been more visible. We project our lives constantly. Yet, psychological studies repeatedly show we are experiencing an epidemic of profound, crushing loneliness. We are hyper-visible, but entirely unseen. So, What happens when the machinery of your own life breaks down? What
Yeah.
happens when you are the one stuck at your own personal mile marker 242, hiding your trauma behind a curated online profile? The challenge of this text isn't just about finding the strength to sit in the dirt for someone else. It's asking if you have the courage to drop the performance, step away from the noise, and admit that you might be the one waiting in the desert, desperately hoping someone will walk up and finally tell you that you are not invisible.